Book of Heaven, Volume 4, Part 14. June 2nd, 1902. The throne of Jesus is composed of virtues. The soul who possesses virtues makes him reign in her heart. This morning, after I struggled very much, Blessed Jesus moved in my interior, and I saw that he was inside of me, as though embraced and sustained by someone else. I was surprised at seeing this, and Jesus told me, "My daughter, the interior of the soul is a filling of passions, and as the soul keeps knocking passions down, so does each virtue take its place, accompanied by degrees of grace. And according to how the virtue keeps being perfected, so does grace administer its degrees to it. And since my throne is composed of virtues, the soul who possesses the virtues provides me with arms, and with the throne, to be able to reign in her heart, keeping me continuously embraced and courted, to the point of making me delight with her. However, the soul can stain herself, while the virtue remains always intact. So, as long as the soul knows how to keep it, the virtue remains with her. But when she does not, the virtue returns to me. That is, to the place from which it came. Therefore, do not be surprised if you saw me like this in your interior. June 15th, 1902. Love is not an attribute of God, but his very nature. The soul who truly loves Jesus cannot become lost. As I was in my usual state, my adorable Jesus transported me outside of myself and told me, "My daughter, all virtues can be said to be my qualities and my attributes. But love cannot be called an attribute of mine, but my very nature. Hence, all virtues form my throne and my qualities, but love forms my very self." On hearing this, I remembered that the day before I had told a person who feared about the uncertainty of salvation that the one who truly loves Jesus Christ can be sure of being saved. To me, I believe it is impossible that our Lord would move away from himself a soul who loves him with all her heart. Therefore, let us think of loving him, and we shall have our salvation in hand. So I asked loving Jesus whether by saying this I had spoken incorrectly, and he added, "My beloved, you said that with reason, because love has this of its own. It forms one object out of two, one will out of two. So the soul who loves me forms one single thing with me, one single will. How can she then be separated from me? More so, since my nature is love, and wherever it finds a few sparks of love in the human nature, immediately it unites them to the eternal love. Therefore, just as it is impossible to form two souls out of one soul, or two bodies out of one body, so it is impossible for one who truly loves me to become lost." June 17th, 1902. Mortification produces glory. This morning I saw my beloved Jesus for just a little, and he seemed to be holding a written paper in his hand, on which one could read, "Mortification produces glory. The one who wants to find the fount of all pleasures must move away from all that may displease God." Having said this, he disappeared. June 29th, 1902. Jesus speaks about France. This morning I saw my adorable Jesus for just a little, and I don't know why. I heard him say, "Poor France, poor France, you rose up and you broke and split the most sacred laws, denying me as your God. You have made of yourself an example for other nations to draw them toward evil. And your example has so much power that the other nations are about to be ruined. Know, however, that as the chastisement for this, you shall be conquered." After this, he withdrew into my interior, and I heard him ask for help, pity, compassion in his many pains. It was something harrowing to hear blessed Jesus ask for help from his creatures. July 1st, 1902. True victims must expose themselves to the pains of Jesus. Machinations against the Church and against the Pope. As I was in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself, kneeling on an altar, together with 2 other people. In the meantime, Jesus Christ appeared over this altar, and he said, "True victims must have communication with my very life. They must avail themselves of my very self, and expose themselves to my own pains." While saying this, he took a pyx in his hand and gave communion to all 3 of us. After this, behind that altar, there seemed to be a door that led into a street filled with people and jam-packed with demons, in such a way that one could not walk without being squeezed by them. And since it was full of thorns, extremely sharp, one could not make a movement without feeling one's flesh being pricked deep inside. At any cost, I would have wanted to escape those diabolical furies, and I almost tried to do it. But someone, I don't know who, prevented me by saying to me, "Everything you see are machinations against the Church and against the Pope. They would want the Pope to get out of Rome by invading the Vatican and taking possession of it. And if you want to avoid these bothers, men and demons shall acquire strength, and shall make these thorns come out that shall prick the Church bitterly. But if you content yourself with suffering them, both the one and the other shall remain weakened." On hearing this, I stopped, but who can say what I went through and suffered? I thought I would never again get out from the midst of those diabolical spirits. However, after staying there almost 1 whole night, the divine protection freed me. July 3rd, 1902. Jesus speaks about his Eucharistic life. Continuing in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself, inside a church. And since I could not find my adorable Jesus, I went to knock at a tabernacle, to have him open it for me. Since he would not open, made brave, I myself opened it, and I found my sole and only good. Who can say my contentment? I remained as though ecstatic in looking at an unspeakable beauty. On seeing me, Jesus flung himself into my arms and told me, "My daughter, each period of my life receives from man distinct and special acts and degrees of imitation, of love, of reparation, and other things. But the period of my Eucharistic life is all life of hiddenness, of transformation, and of continuous consummation. So much so that I can say that after my love reached the excess and was even consumed, in my infinite wisdom, I could not find any other external sign to prove my love for man. And just as my incarnation, life, and passion on the cross receive love, praise, thanksgiving, imitation, my sacramental life receives from man an ecstatic love, a love of dissolving oneself in me, a love of perfect consummation. And as the soul is consumed in my very sacramental life, she can say that she performs, before the divinity, the same offices that I perform continuously before God, for love of men. And this consummation shall make the soul overflow into eternal life. July 7th, 1902. Continuous humiliation with Christ shall give rise to everlasting exaltation with Christ. This morning, since blessed Jesus was not coming, I felt all confused and humiliated. And then, after I struggled very much, he made himself seen for just a little, telling me, "Luisa, always humiliated with Christ." And I, pleased and yearning to be humiliated with Christ, said, "Always, O Lord." And he repeated, "And the always of the humiliation with Christ shall give rise to the always of the exaltation with Christ." So I comprehended that as many humiliations as the soul undergoes with Christ and for love of Christ, if they are continuous, so many times shall the Lord exalt her, and he shall make this exaltation continuously before the whole celestial court, before men, and finally even before demons themselves. July 28th, 1902. A spirit of continuous prayer. Continuing in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself, and I found my adorable Jesus, who, not wanting to show me the troubles of the world, told me, "My daughter, withdraw. Do not want to see the evils most grave that are in the world." And on saying this, he withdrew me himself. And while carrying me, he repeated, "What I recommend to you is a spirit of continuous prayer. This continuous effort of the soul to converse with me, whether with her heart or with her mind, with her mouth or even with a simple intention, renders her so beautiful in my sight that the notes of her heart harmonize with the notes of my heart. I feel so drawn to converse with the soul that I manifest to her not only the works ad extra of my humanity, but I keep manifesting to her something of the works ad intra that the divinity did in my humanity. Not only this, but the beauty that a spirit of continuous prayer makes her acquire is so great that the devil is as though struck by lightning, and remains frustrated in the snares he lays in order to harm this soul. Having said this, he disappeared, and I found myself inside myself. July 31st, 1902. True charity must be disinterested. As I was in my usual state, I saw my adorable Jesus several times, but always in silence. I felt all confused and would not dare to ask him anything. But it seemed that he wanted to tell me something that wounded his sacred heart. Finally, the last time he came, he told me, "My daughter, true charity must be disinterested on the part of the one who does it, and on the part of the one who receives it. If there is interest, that mud produces a smoke that blinds the mind and prevents one from receiving the influence and the effects of divine charity. This is why in many works that are done, even holy, in many charitable cares that are performed, one feels as though a void, and they do not receive the fruit of the charity that they do." August 2nd, 1902. During the whole course of his life, Jesus redid everything, for all in general, and for each one individually. This morning, after letting me struggle very much, all of a sudden my adorable Jesus came, spreading rays of light. I was invested by that light, and I don't know how, I found myself inside of Jesus Christ. Who can say how many things I comprehended inside that most holy humanity? I can only say that his divinity directed his humanity in everything. And since in one single instant the divinity can do as many acts as each of us can do in the whole period of one's life, and as many acts as one wants to do, I comprehended with clarity that because the divinity operated in the humanity of Jesus Christ, during the whole course of his life, blessed Jesus redid for all in general, and for each one individually, everything that each one is obliged to do toward God, in such a way that he adored God for each one in particular. He thanked, repaired, glorified for each one. He praised, suffered, prayed for each one. And I comprehended that everything that each one must do has already been done before in the heart of Jesus Christ. August 10th, 1902. Privations, laments, and necessity of chastisements. As I am greatly afflicted because of the loss of my highest good, my poor heart is lacerated continuously and suffers a continuous death. Now as the confessor came, I was telling him of my poor state, and he began to call him and to place his intention. But no, my mind was left suspended. It would see as though a flash for a few instants, that would escape. and I would return inside myself without seeing him. Oh God, what pain! But these are pains that one does not even know how to express. And then, after much struggling, finally he came, and as I lamented to him, he told me, "My daughter, if you did not know the reason for my absence, perhaps you would have some reason to lament about my absence. But since you do know that I am not coming because I want to chastise the world, wrongly do you lament." And I, what does the world have to do with me? And he, indeed it has to do with you, because if I come, you tell me, "Lord, I myself want to satisfy you on their behalf. I want to suffer for them." And since I am most just, I cannot receive the satisfaction of a debt from both one and the other. And if I wanted to take the satisfaction from you, the world would do nothing but grow ever bolder. Rather, in these times of rebellion, chastisements are so very necessary, and if I did not do so, darkness would become so thick that all would remain blinded. While he was saying this, I found myself outside of myself, and I saw the earth all full of darkness, with just barely a few trails of light. What shall happen to the poor world? It causes one to think much about the most sad things that shall happen. September 3rd, 1902. Everything that Jesus merited in his life, he gave to all creatures, and in a special and superabundant way to the one who is victim for love of him. This morning, as I was in my usual state, I felt a natural malady come to me, but so strongly that I felt I was dying. I feared I might be about to pass from time to eternity, much more so since blessed Jesus was hardly coming, or at the most like a shadow. In fact, if he were coming as usual, I would not be fearing at all. Therefore, so that I might be in a good state, I prayed the Lord to give me the exercise of his holy mind to satisfy for the evils I might have committed with my thoughts. His eyes, his mouth, his hands, feet, heart, and all of his most sacred body, to satisfy for all the evils I might have committed, and for all the good I was supposed to do but did not. While I was doing this, blessed Jesus came, all in festal clothing, in act of receiving me into his arms, and he told me, "My daughter, everything I merited I gave to all creatures, and in a special and superabundant way to the one who is victim for love of me. Behold, anything you want I give you, and not only to you, but to whomever you want." And I, remembering the confessor, said to him, "Lord, if you take me, I pray you to content Father." And he, indeed, he has received some recompense for the charity he has done for you, and since he has cooperated, as you come to me into the sphere of eternity, I shall give him yet more recompense. My pain was getting more and more vigorous, but I felt happy since I was at the harbor of eternity. In the meantime, the confessor came and called me to obedience. I would have wanted to keep everything quiet, But he forced me to say everything, and came out with the usual refrain that, out of obedience, I was not supposed to die. But in spite of this, the malady would not cease. September 4th, 1902. The confessor asks Jesus not to let her die. As I continued to feel ill, I also felt a certain restlessness because of this strange obedience, as if I could not take flight toward my highest and only good, with the addition that, having to celebrate Holy Mass, the confessor did not want to give me communion because of the continuous retching that bothered me. However, since the confessor had told me that out of obedience I should have Jesus Christ touch my stomach, as he came, he touched my stomach, and the continuous retching ceased. But the malady would not cease, and Jesus, seeing me so restless, told me, "My daughter, what are you doing? Don't you know that if death surprises you, finding you restless, you would have to get purgatory? In fact, if your mind is not united with mine, if your will is not one with mine, if your desires are not my same desires, by necessity you need a purge to be transformed completely into me. Therefore be attentive, think only of remaining united with me, and I shall think of the rest." Now, while he was saying this, I saw the church and the Pope, and part of it was leaning on my shoulders. And I also saw the confessor, who pressed Jesus not to take me for now. And the blessed Lord said, "Evils are most grave, and sins are about to reach such a point as no longer to deserve victim souls. That is, the ones who sustain and protect the world before me. If this point touches justice, indeed I shall take her with me." So I understood that things are conditional. September 5th, 1902. Jesus, the angels, and the saints incite Luisa to go with them. The confessor is opposed. I continued to feel ill, and the confessor continued to be resolute. Even more, to get upset that I was not obeying him with regard to not dying, and to praying the Lord to make my suffering cease. On the other hand, I felt incited by blessed Jesus, by the saints, by the angels, to go with them. And I would find myself now with Jesus, now with the celestial citizens. In this state, I felt tortured, not knowing myself what to do. However, I was calm, fearing that if he should take me, I might not be ready to go speedily with him. So I abandoned myself completely in his hands. Now, while I was in this position, I saw the confessor and others praying that I would not be permitted to die. And Jesus told me, "My daughter, I feel I am under violence. Don't you see how they do not want me to take you? And I too feel I am under violence. Truly they would deserve a penalty for putting a poor creature in this torture." And Jesus, "What penalty do you want me to give them?" And I, not knowing what to say before that inexhaustible font of charity, said, "My sweet Lord, Since sanctity brings sacrifice with itself, make them saints, so that if nothing else, they shall obtain their intent of keeping me with them, and I shall obtain the intent of seeing them saints, as they would have the patience of feeling the pain that sanctity brings with itself. On hearing me, Jesus was all pleased, and he kissed me, telling me, "Brava, my beloved, you were able to choose the optimum for their good and for my glory. So for now we must surrender, and I reserve for myself another occasion to take you quickly, giving them no time to do violence to us." Then Jesus disappeared, and I found myself inside myself, with my suffering mitigated for the most part, and with a new vigor, as if I was born again. But God alone knows the pain, the torment of my heart. I hope at least that he may want to accept the hardness of this sacrifice. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 4, Part 14. Fiat.